The Trump administration is battling MAGA conservatives over the rights of states to enact AI regulations. Last week, President Trump signed an executive order aimed at blocking states from enacting those regulations. The backlash was swift. Critics from both parties, including some of the most MAGA-friendly lawmakers, say they are worried banning state regulation gives too much power to AI companies. Here to discuss the looming battle is the Hill senior staff writer, Alexander Bolton. Hey, Alex, thanks so much for chatting with us. So the pushback from the MAGA wing of the Republican Party was strong enough that House Speaker Mike Johnson dropped a provision preempting state AI regulations from the National Defense Authorization Act. Trump has called for unity on this issue. But what are the biggest concerns you're hearing from these conservative lawmakers?
Well, the biggest concerns are that they feel these AI companies are pretty unscrupulous, and what they're particularly worried about is, what the impact on children are going to be, or is going to be, if AI is allowed to operate unfettered. And there's a press conference recently on Capitol Hill with Josh Hawley, the Republican from Missouri, who is certainly a Trump ally, certainly a MAGA populist. And he gathered with some Democratic colleagues and the families of children who either committed suicide or suffered some serious self-harm because of their interactions with these essentially AI chatbots that led them down these kind of dark paths. And so that is one example, and there are others. I think the worry is that this artificial intelligence, these chatbot companions, whether they're chatbots that are posing as therapists or lawyers or mentors or something else, that it could have a real serious societal impact, and they're concerned that it's ultimately going to erode conservative family values, and that's why they want pushback from the government on AI. Now the problem is there hasn't been any real regulation of AI in Washington D.C. There hasn't been a uniform federal standard put out. In the absence of that, states are now looking at doing their own regulation, and conservatives who otherwise love Trump, they feel that states should be able to regulate these big Silicon Valley companies, which are essentially importing California tech valleys to their home states. They want their local governments to be able to set the parameters and regulate as needed. And so, of course, that's something that the AI companies don't want, because once you have a patchwork of regulations, it really inhibits the company's ability to put together a service and for the country as a whole. So it eats into their profits. So they have certainly been lobbying Congress very, very, very assiduously, and the administration, it looks like, to preempt states from regulating AI with kind of the siren song that, well, we'll have a federal standard at one point, at some point, so that we can all do this in an organized way and keep pace with our competitors like China. Problem is, there hasn't been much progress at all with this federal standard. So what's interesting here is that the Republican leadership tried to get this language in the defense authorization bill to prevent states from regulating AI. They dropped it because there was such an angry backlash from their own ranks. And now President Trump is doing an end around Congress by passing an executive order to do exactly what that provision in the defense bill would have done, which was dropped because it was so unpopular with Republicans.
Yeah, so right now you have, I guess, 4 states, Colorado, California, Utah, and Texas, that have passed some state-level regulations. The executive order then threatens to withhold federal funding from states that are enacting that type of regulation. You talk about how the Trump administration sees this. Is this a profit thing for the AI companies and a competition with competitors like China? Like, are those, if you ask the Trump administration for justification, is that where they're coming from?
Well, I think their argument would be that regulations are going to inhibit AI development, and we need to keep pace with China. I mean, China is I think, the strongest argument that the advocates for unfettered AI have, because that is something that unifies really moderate and conservative Republicans, and even Republicans and Democrats. That losing the technological race to China is bad for the economy, it's bad for national security. So that's the strongest argument they have. But really, I think what it's about is pure profits. It's the AI, as if you have any money in the stock market, you might notice that their profits are booming, their profits are expected to boom, and that's why their stock prices have gone through the roof. And if you limit their ability to market to the American population. It eats into their earning projections. It eats into how much money they're making. So that's what it's all about. And we saw during Trump's inauguration, he kind of had the biggest powers of Silicon Valley and the tech industry, up there at the dais with him when he was taking the oath of office. They have poured a lot of money, into the inauguration fund. Some of these big tech companies, they have very deep pockets, and they're clearly wielding a lot of influence. And I think that's why you have some schisms now between Trump and his MAGA base. For instance, Marjorie Taylor Greene has supported you know state regulation of AI. She does not want that to be preempted, and she of course had a big falling out with Trump. So I think some of the conservatives are wondering, or the populist MAGA conservatives are wondering, if Trump is now cozying up to the tech industry because they have all the money and the influence in the economy, and that they feel that some of their conservative family values are being left behind here.
Another one of those MAGA conservatives that has weighed in, although his relationship with President Trump is a bit complicated, is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He posted this on X. I thought it was interesting. He said an executive order can't preempt state legislative action. Should this, movement within the Republican Party be a warning sign to President Trump if he proceeds with this type of a policy program for AI control, that it could put him at odds with some of the core members of his coalition?
I don't think he really cares. I think what he's more interested in is being a champion of AI. I mean, we're talking about a very wealthy industry here, a very powerful industry, and Trump wants to be on its side. And Ron DeSantis, doesn't carry much weight with Donald Trump. I mean, Ron DeSantis is kind of he's on the outer circles of MAGA after challenging Trump in the last election. So I don't think Trump really cares so much what these conservatives are saying. If it actually impacts his approval rating with Republicans, maybe that's a different story. Now, a recent NBC poll came out showing that even the most hardcore MAGA Republicans, or most committed MAGA Republicans, I mean, they aren't as enthusiastic as Trump as they used to be. I think Trump's support among kind of self-identified hardcore MAGA was 78%. Now that's dropped down to 70%. If that continues to erode, maybe it'll change his mind. But let's remember, President Trump he won't be on the ballot again, so he doesn't have to worry about a reelection. And I think he really seems to be more concerned about reshaping the American economy as he sees it should be reshaped. And he views AI as cutting edge technology of the future. He doesn't want it hampered at all by regulation. I mean, that is in a way a traditional Republican position. So I don't know how much influence these MAGA critics are going to have on the president. Although I think it is interesting that the president was hoping that Congress would take care of this first before he had to step in. But the fact that he's issuing this executive order so soon after the legislature rejected passing a law along those same lines shows that he's pretty committed to this position. He wants to keep AI regulation to a minimum, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the courts. I think DeSantis has a pretty good argument, which is that look, state sovereignty is pretty important, or certainly a longstanding value in the American Constitution. Executive order doesn't override that. I think that's a pretty strong legal argument. Now, Supreme Court is very partial to Trump, it seems, these days. So it'd be curious to see where they end up on this issue.
Last question, I'll let you go. Is there a possibility of some kind of a bipartisan movement to enact legislation that would protect state level AI regulation?
I think the most likely thing is nothing happens in Congress. I don't think you're going to pass legislation in Congress, affecting AI or basically, well, I don't. The problem is AI has so much money that you're not going to get a legislation passed through Congress that restricts AI. The industry just has way too much influence for Congress to pass something like that. Now, could there be additional stabs at passing legislation to preempt the states? Maybe, but they're not there yet. And I think a lot of voters are concerned about AI. I think they're scared about AI. I think AI is threatening, and because it threatens jobs. It threatens, kind of society as we know it. When you can't speak to a customer service representative on the phone anymore, you deal with AI. When you are, constantly confronted with AI, and you kind of lose that human experience, I think people find it, disconcerting. And then you have the threat to posed to American jobs. This is actually going to become more and more of an issue. So I think where the future of this issue is, I think the critics of AI are going to, really start to come to the fore over the next few years. And already, I just had a meeting recently with the president of the Teamsters, and he said he's very much focused on AI. Unions are focused on AI, and I think you're going to see more and more, workers focused on it, family values groups focused on it, maybe even religious groups focused on it. So I think the AI backlash is just beginning, but now, is it going to be strong enough to defeat the AI industry? Probably not, because in politics, money talks, and AI has more money than anyone. So it's definitely an interesting issue, and we'll see how it plays out in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if and when that becomes a political issue, where you have more politicians kind of running that as on that as a centerpiece of their policy platform. But for now, we will leave it at that. Alexander Bolton, it's always great to have your insight. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me on.